Today is June 1st, 2018. Welcome to Blackstone Intelligence. I'm Jake Morphonios. This is part 2 of my 3-part series on the deep state in America. In today's episode, what I'm going to do is show you in greater detail how the deep state functions, how it does it under the radar, how it conducts secret operations for the benefit of powerful special interests that often make their money through the business of war. Now, I said yesterday that the deep state is a network of United States governmental and non-governmental entities. The U.S. Intelligence Committee is very much a significant part of this deep state apparatus, most notably the United States Central Intelligence Agency. Well, various Rothschild-linked parties in our shadow government decided that their myriad interests in taking control of Syria kind of merged together. It would be of mutual benefit to work together. So they conspired to use the apparatus of the deep state to conquer Syria, to overthrow the president, and install their own puppet government, a Muslim Brotherhood government. And this started with the deployment of the CIA to go in and start destabilizing the country so that there could be a revolt, a rebellion, an uprising. The attempted coup that was initiated by the CIA they started it pretty much in 2011. This was not the first time that this happened in Syria. And just like today, these previous CIA coups have each been intended to aid the state of Israel, who is very much one of these interested parties who has a vested interest in seeing the government toppled there. Modern-day Israel declared its independence in 1948. That very next year, 1949, the CIA orchestrated a coup against the Syrians to install a puppet, a leader named Colonel Husni al-Zaim. This was the guy they put in there. And the architects of this coup were CIA officers Stephen J. Meade and Miles Copeland Jr. We know a lot about this coup because Copeland details a lot of it in his autobiography, which is called The Game Player, Confessions of the CIA's Original Political Operative. He thinks a little too much of himself. He certainly wasn't the original political operative. Well, just a couple years after this, the CIA tried to carry out another coup in Syria. You see, Syria is, if you've got Israel here, Lebanon, Syria is one of Israel's northern neighbors. So the original plan was to use the Iraqi army to topple this regime in Syria. But the plan changed, calling for direct action by the CIA, by actual CIA agents to go in there. And the coup was going to not only take control of Syria, but they were also going to mastermind this in such a way that they could grab sections out of several of Israel's neighbors. They were going to take territories in Lebanon and Jordan, also over in Iraq. The plan was called Operation Straggle. And the Dulles brothers, who were Rothschild operatives inside the United States, they were part of the shadow government. They are the ones who helped to organize this scheme. You've got Alan Dulles. He was the CIA director at this time. And his brother John Foster Dulles was conveniently the U.S. Secretary of State. Just like John Kerry was publicly talking about peace and diplomacy in Syria in the clips I showed you, telling the public that's really what he's after, just like he was at that time secretly working with the CIA to carry out a Syrian coup, that's what was happening with these Dulles brothers. John Dulles was out there as Secretary of State saying publicly he opposed regime change. Don't want to destabilize the region. Privately, though, he and his brother were trying to get President Eisenhower to sign off on this plot. Now, what kind of screwed things up was Israel acted too early. Before this plot could be carried out, they invaded Egypt. And public sentiment back then was very much anti-Israel. Israel back in the 50s, there was not the love of Israel throughout America the way there is today. So public sentiment was very much against Israel, and the public did not want to see any more meddling in an already hot region by the United States. So Operation Straggle couldn't be brought to fruition, and this was happening in 1956. But the Dulles brothers, they kept trying. The very next year, 1957, they planned another coup in Syria, codenamed Operation Wappen, Wappen. And the architect of that coup was Kermit Roosevelt. Kermit Roosevelt, I've talked about in the past, he's the guy who successfully carried out a CIA coup in Iran just 4 years earlier in 1953. Well, part of this new operation, Wappen, it included paying $3 million in bribes to Syrian military officers to keep their mouths shut, but you're going to play a role in this, you're going to help us carry out this coup. But the operation fell apart when some of these officers who were loyal to their government, they turned in the CIA operatives who were paying the money, they turned them into Syrian intelligence. And so Syrian intelligence rounded these guys up and deported them. Their names were Robert Malloy, Francis Jetton, and Howard Rocky Stone. And also along with this, the CIA plot was exposed to the public. Of course, here in America, the Rothschild-controlled media spun the story, and they actually made up, well, I won't say that yet. I'll give you that in a second. They printed in the U.S. media that in Syria, the Soviet Union was covertly sending in over 100 fighter jets into Syria, and that they were going to use this to branch out and attack all of these surrounding Arab states and topple them and take control of them. And so that necessitated a strong U.S. military response. And the Dulles brothers were pushing this. They were saying, you know, that the Soviets in Syria, this is going to be a launch pad for invading all of you. And so that got the surrounding neighbors riled up. The U.S. deploys a naval fleet. They send the U.S. Navy off the coast of Syria. And they got several of Syria's neighbors, including Turkey, to start sending troops to Syria's border. Turkey sent 50,000 troops alone. And a full-scale invasion of Syria was imminent. But what happened was, it came out that actually the Soviet Union had not sent 100 fighter jets into Syria. They hadn't actually sent 50 in. They actually hadn't even sent one fighter jet into Syria. The entire thing was exposed as CIA propaganda. So, seeing that there was no real threat after all, Syria's neighbors said, forget this, we've been duped, and they withdrew their military deployments without invading Syria. Now, does all of this sound eerily familiar to you all? It should, because that's exactly what we're doing today, over and over and over. That's what the CIA is doing in Syria. It's like we're replaying the exact same propaganda and the false flags that the CIA used in the past. Like they've got a playbook and they're like, let's do this one again. And they just follow it step by step. History is repeating itself. If Americans knew history to the extent that they know mindless trivia and games and entertainment, the powers that be could never get away with all of these schemes. It's because the public would recognize these repeating cycles. They wouldn't be so easily manipulated. Well, when this 1957 military invasion plot fell apart, the CIA had to revert back to other methods of destabilizing Syria. One thing they did was they put together a plot with the British MI6. The MI6 is their version of the CIA. Put together a plot with the MI6 to start assassinating key Syrian officials, specifically officials who were speaking out against the CIA's coup attempts. They wanted to remove these people that they saw as opponents. Now, this past decade, we know a great deal about these assassination plots because documents detailing the plans were uncovered in Britain. And one of the documents was a paper written by the defense minister in Britain at that time, Duncan Sandys, who said this. This is written in one of the papers, quote, "Once a political decision is reached to proceed with internal disturbances in Syria, CIA is prepared and MI6 will attempt to mount minor sabotage and coup de main incidents within Syria, working through contacts with individuals. The two services should consult, as appropriate to avoid any overlapping or interference with each other's activities. Incidents should not be concentrated in Damascus. The operation should not be overdone, and to the extent possible, care should be taken to avoid causing key leaders of the Syrian regime to take additional personal protective measures. And another thing that these documents revealed was that the United States and the United Kingdom, their intelligence agencies, were working with an innocent-sounding group called the Free Syria Committee. They were working through this group. This committee was actually a front for the CIA and the MI6 to funnel money and to funnel weapons to moderate rebels and affiliated groups, including one called the Muslim Brotherhood. We'll come back to that. According to these documents, these various groups were going to carry out false flag attacks. They were going to try and make it look like the Syrian government was the one carrying out these attacks. Let me read directly from these papers. I think you'll find it enlightening. Quote, Syria will be made to appear as the sponsor of plots, sabotage, and violence directed against neighboring governments. It's incredible. The goal of these false flag attacks, of course, would be to provide some kind of pretext for Syria's neighbors, particularly Iraq at that time, to invade Syria and try and topple the regime. See, this is called psychological warfare. And among these documents, one of them was called the Working Group Report. And the Working Group Report specifically referred to PSYOPs. It said this, quote, it is impossible to exaggerate the importance of the psychological warfare aspects of the present exercise. You know, this coordination by the CIA and the MI6 back during this previous coup attempt back in the 50s, it reminds me of the most recent chemical attacks, including the one this year in Douma in Syria, where the Russians were able afterward to reveal that they had proof that MI6 had been supplying large supplies of chlorine to moderate rebel groups who were then going to use these to create chlorine bombs. The attack in Douma was exactly what the CIA was doing back then. It's the same thing. It's a false flag attack. This is not conspiracy theory. Some people say, oh, these are all conspiracy theories. But this is documented history. They have a documented, provable, verifiable history of this. And just as the Douma chlorine bomb was a false flag, it didn't trigger the result that the CIA wanted most recently in 2018. It helped, but it didn't go to the extent they wanted. Similarly, back in 1957, their false flags and their plots failed to produce the intended result. But that's further back. Let's skip forward a bit. Let's go to the 1990s. CIA activity in Syria. What they were doing throughout the 90s, the early 2000s, was the CIA had set up rendition centers inside Syria, which is a polite way of saying black sites for the purpose of torture. That's what a rendition center is. It's a torture site. And so what the CIA was doing was they were taking people they had kidnapped around the world into rendition sites in Syria. Also during this time, I was in Thailand from 93 to 95. And there were CIA rendition sites inside Thailand as well. Well, one former CIA agent, a guy named Robert Baer, he told a reporter this, quote, if you want a person to be tortured, you send them to Syria. If you want someone to disappear completely, never to be seen again, you send them to Egypt. He's talking about these rendition sites. Now, here's where we start to get into the latest CIA activities in Syria. All of that's just kind of background. I want my audience to know that this is not something new. This is the CIA. It never gets better. It has never been better than this. It will never be better than this in the future. After shadow government operatives, and I'm talking about Ziocons like Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld and Paul Wolfowitz, after they got the United States military embroiled in this so-called war on terror, the CIA amassed its own private army using contract mercenaries, mostly from Blackwater, but also some other paramilitaries. And these mercenaries carried out scores of raids against Syrian targets. Most of them were civilian targets, and many, many civilians were killed by these mercenary forces, the CIA coordinated mercenary. It's a private army. And the secret order for these raids had been given in 2004 by Bush. As a result of these raids, the Syrian government protested. They said, "What are you doing killing our citizens? The CIA is not supposed to be here doing this." Starting in 2006, all of this was confirmed by WikiLeaks, by the way. The documents are out there. Starting in 2006, the deep state started putting money into the development of rebel groups inside Syria because the CIA knew that it was going to carry out another coup. Remember, guys, I don't want to rehash the whole thing, but General Wesley Clark's famous revelation after meeting at the Pentagon when he learned that there was a plan after 9/11 to knock off a series of nations. Syria was one of them. So this is part of it, as the WikiLeaks documents confirm, that they started putting money and efforts into building up rebel forces. Well, the deep state had been able to keep this program secret until enough evidence had come out that it had to be acknowledged by the U.S. government. And indeed, Barack Obama did make a public statement about it in 2013, although what he did was he falsely claimed that the CIA, all they had been doing was they set up a group, maybe about 50 people inside Syria. They were just working with them. It was a total lie. It was a total lie because by 2013, I had already been reporting on this for some time, that the CIA had been relocating mercenaries from Libya up to Syria, and that it was carrying out the gun-running operation out of Benghazi, Libya. And that brings us to the time period that I really want to focus on now for the rest of this video. What the CIA was doing was opening command centers all around Syria, all around the region, in cooperation with other nations, with Turkey, with Gulf state allies like Saudi Arabia, Qatar. One key base that they opened up is in Adana, Turkey. This is about 60 miles from the northern Syrian border. It was a communications center. What the CIA did was they provided sophisticated communications technology to these rebel groups that it was arming, that it was giving weapons to, so that they could communicate to the CIA base in Turkey. That way there could be direct coordination between the CIA and these so-called moderate rebels to coordinate their attacks against Syria. And by the way, this base wasn't just used by the CIA for communications. It was also home to a U.S. air base called Incirlik, something, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. Now, where was all this money coming from to finance these rebels? Because the American taxpayer sure didn't give permission for this. Well, some of it certainly was coming from the CIA's own Black Ops budget, much of which comes from the CIA's global heroin trafficking operations. And I won't get off on a tangent here, but I'll have to tell you guys again, those who are new, about the time I was in Chiang Rai, up in the Golden Triangle between Burma and Thailand, up there working, and had a contract put out on me by the world's largest opium producer at the time, General Kun Sa, a warlord who was trying to overthrow the government because they thought I was CIA. Had to hide out for a handful of weeks until I could get on a bus and get out of there. But aside from in this all, the CIA was very much involved with Kunsa, is my point. But aside from the opium money, the global heroin trafficking operation that the CIA runs, then they get a lot of their money from that. And that's why we're in Afghanistan, of course, still, because of the poppy fields there. Protect the poppy fields. But there was also a whole lot of money coming in from billionaire power players around the Arab world, specifically some of these huge billionaires in Saudi Arabia and Qatar. These are members of the Rothschild network, by the way. They're not Americans, they're not British, they're Arabians, but they are still members of this Rothschild network. Now, beyond that, as I reported in 2012, the CIA was funneling shoulder-launched MANPADS, which are surface-to-air missiles, out of Benghazi. They were going up through the Mediterranean, up into Turkey to the CIA bases that I'm talking about, and then they would be transported down to the bloodstained hands of these terrorist groups, including the Free Syrian Army. Now, I bring this up because I want to emphasize that this was not the work of what we know to be our elected government. This was being orchestrated by unelected cryptocrats, members of the shadow government. It's all being coordinated without the oversight of the U.S. Congress. And in order for all of these various activities, CIA activities, to be legal, Barack Obama would have had to sign an official memorandum authorizing all of this covert support to these Syrian fighters, which he had not done before this operation started. They already were doing this before authorization had been given. See, the attitude of the CIA is that it would rather ask for forgiveness after the fact than ask for permission to begin with. Eventually, Obama did sign one of these memos, but like I said, it was only well after the program had been going on in the dark without authorization. So the State Department allocates tens of millions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer money to start helping these rebel groups. But knowing that the American people didn't want to arm these people, we don't want I go to work, you go to work. Do you go to work your butt off all day long, and think it's okay for the U.S. government to take some of the money you made that day and buy weapons to go kill children in Syria? Is that proper use of your money, your hard-earned labor? Do you like working for the benefit of these bankers and everybody? Of course not. The U.S. taxpayer never would have authorized this. So this money that the U.S. State Department is authorizing is supposed to be going for non-lethal help, including funding for things like that communications equipment I mentioned. The State Department also allocated over 60 million U.S. tax dollars to go to humanitarian groups inside Syria. Now, of course, when we look at who these groups are, we've got Al-Qaeda affiliates, like the White Helmets, right? Well, during this period of time, we've got these two bisexual senators, John McCain and Lindsey Graham, whose extracurricular relationship is an open secret in Washington. Okay, these guys were extremely critical of Barack Obama because he was not more accepting of these anti-Syrian operations. They were saying he just wasn't tough enough. They wanted Obama to arm the rebels, to do more to topple the regime. And since Obama was dragging his feet, John McCain just decided to take matters into his own hands. And in the process, he violated his constitutional oath of office. He committed multiple acts of treason against the American people. Guys, John McCain is definitely a member of the shadow government. He was working from inside the United States Senate with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. There's tons of pictures of them looking all lovey-dovey together on the different junkets they went on around the world. But there's lots of evidence of McCain working with Clinton to topple the Libyan government by arming mercenaries inside Libya. Now, I'll put up a photo of John McCain in April of 2011. This was taken in front of the courthouse in Benghazi, Libya. The man next to him is Ambassador Chris Stevens. McCain was there to marshal support for the Al-Qaeda affiliates that the CIA was using to try and topple Gaddafi. And McCain helped to provide these mercenary groups with political support, with money, with weapons. And as we know, of course, things did not go so well for Ambassador Stevens, because the very next year, some of those same rebels that were being armed by the CIA in Benghazi, they went to the U.S. Embassy there in Benghazi, sacked it, set it on fire, captured Stevens, raped him, and then killed him. So the old saying is true: live by the sword, die by the sword. And on this same trip, McCain also traveled over to Syria, where he met with leaders from the CIA-backed Syrian rebel groups. McCain went back in 2012, and he met with them again, along with leaders of ISIS. After the trip, McCain, like a dummy, bragged about this important visit with these brave freedom fighters. The truth is, McCain is a CIA asset. I've been talking about him for years, going back to when I campaigned against him during the 2000 presidential election. I despised McCain. I despised George W. Bush. They were the front runners. So I got a job working as the regional campaign manager for Steve Forbes. And in that 2000 presidential election cycle, despite there being over a dozen declared Republican candidates, I knew that none of those guys were going to pose any serious chance of beating Bush or McCain. The only one who might be able to do it was Forbes. He was a billionaire, well-financed. Ultimately, the campaign finished in third place behind Bush and McCain. But I believe in fighting, even when you know you're probably going to lose. If it's the right thing to do, doesn't matter, win or lose, do the right thing. I had a private interaction with McCain during that campaign, just minutes before the start of the South Carolina presidential debate, which I've talked about in the past. In a handful of years later, in 2008, during that campaign season, I was working for the Ron Paul campaign as a writer during the Republican primaries. We were trying to beat John McCain. Ultimately, he's the guy who won the party nomination and ran against Obama. But in the process of doing opposition research into McCain, I had dug up a lot of dirt on him. And so I've got my reasons for disliking McCain. The guy's a very lecherous man. Very, very bad guy. Well, skip to 2012 to this visit in Syria. McCain was trying hard to convince people that the CIA-backed groups they're good guys. These are freedom fighters. He wanted the public to believe that these were not terrorists. Now, that was a really hard case to make, considering all of these so-called resistance groups that he was backing were infested with Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra Front members. They were all radicalized. Now, in 2012, ISIS didn't have a name yet, but they were already forming. Libyan mercenaries were still moving up into Iraq and Syria, and they were merging with these existing extremist groups. Well, John McCain was one deep state CIA asset that actually worked to set ISIS up. And I'm gonna show that to you. We'll talk about another important CIA asset in a minute, but first let's go over these people who were in this photo with John McCain. I'm going to start with the one who is here. This guy, there is dispute over who he is. Many believe that this person is a Jewish Mossad agent named Elliot Shimon, also known as Simon Elliott. And the reason that this claim is significant is because it is widely believed that this man is currently the supreme caliph of ISIS, who goes by the Islamic, in Arabic, his name is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. There's a lot that can be discussed about this theory, but I don't want to take time to go over all of it now. I'll just say that I think it is very likely that, yes, this man probably is Elliot Shimon. And though I'm not completely convinced of it, I do think there's a fair case that can be made that this is al-Baghdadi. And one of the reasons why is because of who's standing next to him in this photo. One member of al-Baghdadi's inner circle was this man. He's wearing a shirt that says, "No War Generation." The funny thing is, this man is actually an al-Qaeda member. His name is Abu Mosa. When ISIS was formed, he was made the Islamic State's official press officer. So he's like the Sarah Huckabee Sanders of ISIS. And we can compare the photo of the man in McCain's photo to a still photo that I grabbed from a video by Vice. They interviewed him years ago. And also, Abu Mosa was killed by the Syrian army in 2014, and we have a photo of that, of his body there. Given that this guy, Abu Mosa, was an important person to al-Baghdadi and ISIS, he was one of his right-hand men, it kind of lends credence to the possibility that the man standing next to Abu Mosa in the McCain photo is in fact al-Baghdadi, before he grew out his beard. All right, Abu Mosa was killed in August of 2014. In 2012, during the organizational process, Baghdadi would have a man with this level of importance to the Islamic State around him. And so that's probably, they stayed partnered up, is what I think. Well, next we have Muhammad Noor. And in a separate photo from this same event, we have Ammar al-Dadiki. Ammar al-Dadiki. These two men, Noor and Dadiki, are terrorists. These are terrorists who had already by this time kidnapped 11 Shiite civilians from Lebanon. What happened was, after McCain had tweeted out pictures of himself with these men, a newspaper in Lebanon that was very familiar with the kidnappings, they recognized the terrorists and they published a story. Let me read part of that story. Quote, U.S. Senator John McCain was photographed with a known affiliate of the rebel group responsible for the kidnapping of 11 Lebanese Shiite pilgrims 1 year ago, during a brief and highly publicized visit inside Syria this week. The pilgrims were kidnapped by armed rebels in Azaz, in Syria's Aleppo province, in May last year as they were making their way back to Lebanon from Iran. Two of the kidnapped, Anwar Ibrahim and Hussein Ali Omar, were released in August and September, but intense negotiations are still underway for the remaining 9, believed to be in the custody of the Northern Storm Brigade, headed by rebel commander Ammar al-Dadiki. The Northern Storm Brigade also claimed responsibility for the kidnap of a Lebanese journalist in October. Something that had happened is that after McCain put out the photo, one of those 2 kidnapped prisoners that had been released, one of the hostages, he was shown these photos. And he said, absolutely, that's Muhammad Noor. This is the guy who took the propaganda photos of us when we were being held in captivity. Yeah, that's him. And then he also, this same guy, this hostage, identified al-Dadiki, the rebel commander who was in charge of the kidnapping. He said, yeah, that's the guy in this photo with McCain. Speaking of Dadiki, he was killed not long after this photo was taken while fighting up in Aleppo. Now, one more note about Muhammad Noor. Muhammad Noor is also one of the kidnappers involved in the production of some of those high-profile ISIS beheading videos. Do you remember those? He was involved in the production of 3 of the beheading videos. There were 3 of them. And I did a lot of reporting. I did some pretty big, extensive reports in 2013 on the production of those propaganda videos. And I demonstrated to you how that they were actually orchestrated by intelligence agencies. They were hoaxes in the sense that the videos were staged, but those men were still killed. Some people said, oh, they weren't really killed. Yes, they were. They were killed off camera, though. That's because they thought that they were working with the MI6 and with the CIA. They thought they were going to that this was going to work out well for them if they cooperated. That's why you don't see them resisting or anything. If any of you guys have been my viewers that long, if you remember those videos or anything, but shout out in the comments section. I'd like to know who some of my oldest watchers are. So here we have U.S. Senator John McCain, who is confirmed to be meeting with an Al-Qaeda member who became the press secretary of ISIS. He's there with 2 terrorist kidnappers, one of whom helped to produce ISIS beheading videos, and possibly there with the leader of ISIS himself, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. McCain calls these guys moderate rebels. And that's why I'm always I think it's such a farce when Obama and McCain and anyone else refers to these people as moderates. Since when is ISIS moderate? Since when is cutting someone's head off a moderate thing to do? Well, John McCain was instrumental in arming these murderous, satanic thugs. Like I said, John McCain is a traitor to America. Unfortunately, we are not going to get to see John McCain face the death penalty, which is the punishment for treason. He'll never face trial for the things that he did, but he should have. George Washington used to take people like John McCain and hang them from the gallows. Now, I don't have bloodlust. It's not that I love to see people die. But when you are a traitor to America, when you have as many hundreds of thousands of people who have died as a result of John McCain and his dirty dealings, his operations as a deep state operative, you deserve the death penalty. Now, if you're wondering who helped McCain to get connected to these specific people, I'm going to go over that in a minute. But there's one more person in this photo that we need to talk about first. This man, Muaz Mustafa. Mustafa was McCain's intermediary at these meetings, and I did some digging into his background. Mustafa is the head of an organization called the Syrian Emergency Task Force. Its website describes the organization as a tax-exempt 501c3 created to support the demands of the Syrian people for freedom and democracy. So I wondered, why would an innocent humanitarian guy like Mustafa, why would he be sitting down with ISIS and Al-Qaeda with John McCain? So I started investigating. First of all, looking through the website, I found that it's full of fake pictures. For example, on this page, we see all kinds of enthusiastic task force volunteers. The problem is that every single one of these pictures are stock photos. The same photos appear on several other websites by other organizations. In fact, most of the photos all throughout this task force website are not genuine. Only a handful are. Then I looked into the backgrounds of the members of the board members on this organization, and I learned that most of them are members of the Muslim Brotherhood. In fact, the entire Syrian Emergency Task Force is a front for the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, a lot of you have heard the name Muslim Brotherhood, but you may not know what it means. So let me take a minute to talk about what the Muslim Brotherhood is, because it's playing a very, very big role in CIA operations. Always has, probably always will. They're heavily involved in operations in North Africa and the Middle East. The Brotherhood was formed in Egypt back in 1928 by a fundamentalist. This was a man who advocated violent jihad to overthrow the surrounding secular governments in the Muslim world. And he wanted to see them replaced with government by strict Sharia law. The Brotherhood is the oldest Islamist political group in the Arab world. And their vision is to form a universal system of rule, a universal system of control that's based on Sharia. That's the vision. The Brotherhood itself is a Sunni organization, and if you don't know what that is, Islam has two primary denominations. You've got the Shia or the Shiites. They make up about 15%. They're found primarily in Iran, with others in Iraq, Lebanon. They've got sizable populations in Syria, Bahrain, Yemen. Then you've got the Sunni Muslims, and they make up around 85% of the total Muslims in the world. They're concentrated in places like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, pretty much everywhere else. So the Muslim Brotherhood is a Sunni organization. How they operate is they create charities to engage in social outreach. And some of these charities, though, the problem is they're used as fronts to launder money used in extremist or terrorist activities. Back when I was a financial crimes investigator for a big bank, one of the things that I did was I looked into questionable financial transactions by some of these Islamic charities and their affiliates. And so I can say from personal knowledge, this is a real problem. And Muslim Brotherhood organizations, they have been involved in some really bad things. Their slogan, the official slogan of the Muslim Brotherhood is, quote, "Allah is our objective, the Prophet is our leader, the Quran is our law, jihad is our way, dying in the way of Allah is our highest hope." It is, like I said, it's a goal of the Brotherhood to create this utopian Islamic world that's controlled by a totalitarian caliphate. They would like to see everybody in the world governed by Sharia. Well, many countries have correctly identified and designated the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. Over in the UK, they have actually passed laws to bar members of the Muslim Brotherhood from even entering the country. And the UK has worked to expose various Islamic charities that are operating as fronts for the Brotherhood. They did a good job. In fact, they had an 18-month investigation into the Brotherhood and their different fronts there in the UK that were working with terror groups. But if we come over here to the United States, the laws are not so strict. We do have the FBI, which refuses to meet with anyone from the Brotherhood or its front groups. And one of those front groups that the FBI has been refusing to meet with is a group called the Council on American Islamic Relations. Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE for short. Despite all of these concerns all around the world, the UK, even inside the FBI, about the Brotherhood, Barack Obama was notable for his work with them through their front groups. We know that Obama lived as a kid in Indonesia for a period of time. The records are out there. You can find them on the internet showing his school records where he's registered at a Muslim school. His religious faith is listed as Islam. That's not conspiracy theory. Maybe he didn't keep that, deep religious faith or whatever throughout his life, but at least he was at one time, he is confirmed to have been Muslim. Well, years later, when his wife, Michelle, got a job working for an attorney, this woman's name was Valerie Jarrett. And Valerie Jarrett was helping a mafia boss in Chicago who was the mayor, Mayor Daley. Valerie Jarrett was working for him, and Michelle Obama got a job working for Valerie Jarrett. Valerie Jarrett, in most of her photos, she looks, it's hard to tell that she's African American, but she is. She's from Iran originally. So Jarrett and the Obamas became very, very close over the years. And when Obama entered the White House, what he did was he brought Jarrett on board as his senior advisor. She was like his consigliere in the same way that Huma Abedin was the right-hand woman to Hillary Clinton. We know that in current news, people are hearing the name Valerie Jarrett because actress Roseanne Barr just got fired from her sitcom because she sent a tweet out that a lot of people found offensive, saying that if the Muslim Brotherhood and Planet of the Apes had a baby, it would look like Valerie Jarrett. So, setting aside that clearly racial overtone, Roseanne was correct in linking. I'm sorry, it was just. Roseanne even said, now I don't know if it's true, maybe she's totally making it up. Roseanne said she did not know that Valerie Jarrett was a black woman. And you look at her pictures and she does look white in most of her photos. She looks like, white, maybe something, but anyway, so the Planet of the Apes comment was, maybe it was just meant to be racist, but this is Roseanne Barr. She's not the brightest bulb on the Christmas tree. She may have thought that Valerie Jarrett was just an, funny-looking white woman. Judicial Watch has done extensive reporting on Jarrett, showing her links to the Muslim Brotherhood. And back when Obama was in the White House, he invited CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations, to come to the White House and sit down and meet with Valerie Jarrett to discuss their mutual concerns. So long story short, this Syrian Emergency Task Force is a Muslim Brotherhood front. The Syrian Emergency Task Force is very similar to what I was talking about earlier in this video, that innocuously named Free Syria Committee that the CIA was using back in '57 to funnel money to the Muslim Brotherhood rebels that the CIA was using to arm and carry out false flag attacks against the Syrians. So it's no coincidence that the primary purpose of this Syrian Emergency Task Force, despite claiming to be a charity, no coincidence that what they're doing is actively lobbying for the armed overthrow of the Syrian government. And the way they do this is they send their representatives to make congressional office visits. They go in and talk to congressmen, congresswomen, try and set up junkets for congressmen and other key foreign policy decision makers. A junket is basically an all-expense paid vacation for a lawmaker to travel to a foreign country, supposedly on fact-finding business, but it's a soft form of bribery, is what it is. Well, I dug deeper into the work of this organization, and oddly enough, they also advocate for the overthrow of the government of Cuba, which has been a long-time goal of the CIA. It brings to mind the botched Bay of Pigs invasion, where the CIA tried to overthrow Castro. So don't tell me that the CIA is not linked to this Syrian Emergency Task Force, because it is. And I'll prove it to you. I'm going to prove it to you by outing a CIA operative. This is Dr. Elizabeth O'Baggy. She's the woman in the hijab standing with John McCain and the terrorists in that photo. O'Baggy has a pretty impressive history. She's from Salt Lake City, Utah, but no, she's not a Mormon. She speaks fluent Arabic. She even studied political science and some various Arabic studies while she was attending university in Egypt. Dr. O'Baggy was a writer for The Atlantic, which is a fairly decent publication. And starting in the summer of 2012, she worked as a senior analyst for the Institute for the Study of War. Dr. O'Baggy she wrote this one article in particular, very influential, about Syria and the need for war. And this was published in the Wall Street Journal. In fact, John McCain and Secretary of State John Kerry both quoted from her Wall Street Journal article, pointing to Dr. O'Baggy's expertise on Syria in their own speeches calling for the overthrow of Assad. But O'Baggy had some secrets. Turns out she was lying about her credentials. Dr. O'Baggy didn't actually have a doctorate degree in anything. And as a result, this forced the Institute to distance itself. They had to disavow her and fire her from the job. Let me read the announcement. Quote, "The Institute for the Study of War has learned and confirmed that contrary to her representations, Miss Elizabeth O'Baggy does not in fact have a PhD degree from Georgetown University. ISW has accordingly terminated Miss O'Baggy's employment effective immediately." And the Wall Street Journal, which, you know, is my favorite publication ever since they did that hit piece on me, the Wall Street Journal also had to cover itself to save face. The journal reported that they did not know at the time that in publishing her pro-war article, they didn't know that she was covertly working as a paid lobbyist for the Syrian Emergency Task Force. Turns out she was making money from trying to sell a war, and the Wall Street Journal helped her out with that. She was a lobbyist. She was getting paid to lobby on behalf of this Muslim Brotherhood front. She was trying to get members of Congress to send heavy weaponry to these terrorist groups in Syria. O'Baggy has all of the characteristics, all of the telltale signs of an undercover CIA asset. She's a CIA operative, and I've got some experience with undercover CIA assets, as my own stepfather was one of them. During Vietnam, my stepfather was recruited by the CIA. He was a sniper assassin for the Phoenix Project. And after the war, when he returned to Miami, he was they set him up as an undercover narcotics agent, part of Miami Vice, and he was in on plenty of dirty deals, tucked away quite a bit of money for himself. He was only my stepfather for 5 years. He and my mom divorced when I was 16, but I was perceptive enough, even in my youth, to know that this guy was corrupt. He was dirty. He had these different covers, elaborate backstories. So I recognize a lot of these same characteristics in O'Baggy. She's a total liar. Despite earning money by trying to start a war, here's what she told a reporter. Well, let me read you a quote. "I'm not a warmonger. I'm not advocating the United States starts a war or get in the middle of one. At heart, I'm just a researcher." Who moonlights as a lobbyist, asking congressmen to send weapons to terrorists in Syria. Well, after she was fired, O'Baggy put out an official statement. This is what she said, quote, "I have never tried to hide that I've worked closely with opposition and rebel commanders. That's what allows me to travel more safely in Syria." So this woman's story as to why she is so closely connected to terrorist leaders is because it makes it safer for her while she travels. Yeah, that's not CIA. And by the way, after O'Baggy was fired from the Institute back in 2013, less than 2 weeks later, she got another job. John McCain hired her as his assistant. And that says a lot, given that McCain is a CIA asset himself. There's a lot more that I could tell you about O'Baggy that would flesh out the case for her being a CIA asset, but I want to keep moving here. And remember, there is a difference. You can be a CIA asset and not be an actual CIA agent. They're different things. So, while digging deeper into Mustafa's Syrian Emergency Task Force operations, I found some photos and video clips of him in Turkey back in 2014. There was a meeting held in Turkey that was intended to help coordinate and discuss ways to arm these Syrian rebels. And one of the more prominent men, and there weren't a whole lot of people, but there's a handful of them. One of the prominent men at the meeting was Executive Director Mustafa from the Syrian Emergency Task Force. There was another guy there. The guy sitting at the head of the table is U.S. Congressman Adam Kinzinger. Kinzinger was there on a junket, having been lobbied by this woman over here, our CIA asset, Dr. Elizabeth O'Baggy. Kinzinger is a big-time advocate for war in Syria. He's also a big-time liar. This is the guy who falsely told the U.S. media that Bashar al-Assad was trying to kill Syrian Christians, when in fact, nearly the entire Christian community in Syria has publicly backed Assad, because Assad is the one who is protecting them from the rebels that are killing them. But now I want to point out someone else who was at this small gathering in Turkey. Here we have a screenshot of Congressman Kinzinger arriving at the meeting, getting out of these, black SUVs. But take a look at the bald guy over here who got out of the vehicle with him. You recognize him? That is Evan McMullin. This is the man who tweeted that there is no such thing as the deep state. This is the CIA agent who tried to keep Donald Trump from winning the state of Utah by throwing his own hat into the presidential ring. I'll save the story of how the CIA tried to keep Trump from winning the presidency in another video. And to cast out any doubt that Evan McMullin was working with his team of people this team of people, here's a photo of him. We've got Kinzinger, Mustafa, Obagi, and of course, Evan McMullin. Folks, this is the deep state, and Evan McMullin is very much a part of it. This gathering in Turkey was a combination of power players, members of this shadow government. You've got everybody from a crooked U.S. congressman to the leader of a Muslim Brotherhood front group lobbying for war. You've got a CIA operative who is using fake credentials and working with her fellow CIA contacts in the Wall Street Journal to promote pro-war propaganda. And remember, the Wall Street Journal is owned by billionaire Zionist Rupert Murdoch, the guy who also owns Fox News, and the guy who was also sitting on the board of directors of Genie Oil with Lord Jacob Rothschild, Vice President Dick Cheney, and former CIA Director James Woolsey. And of course, Genie Oil has been awarded contracts by Benjamin Netanyahu to pretty much take the oil in the Golan Heights, which is Syrian territory, and that's one of the reasons that all of this is happening in Syria. It's about the oil. It's about private groups that are affiliated with the Rothschilds that want to make money, and they use the CIA. But Assad is not going to say yes to this. No, you can't come take our oil. No, you can't put pipelines through. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. Time to get rid of them. Well, let's talk a little bit more about this deep state operative, Evan McMullin. Like Obagi, McMullin is from Utah. What a coincidence. Utah also has one of the largest NSA centers in the world. Each summer while McMullin was in college, he was doing summer internships with the CIA. And after he got his degree, he spent a year as a volunteer in Israel and also over in Jordan, working as a volunteer refugee settlement officer. The truth is, he was almost certainly being groomed as an undercover CIA asset. And after this time, he was formally hired by the CIA as an operations officer. And he spent years with the agency. After he allegedly quit the CIA, he was placed basically into government as a chief policy director and as a senior advisor on national security issues on the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House of Representatives. And that's not a surprising move. Remember, I said in yesterday's video that the CIA and the U.S. State Department work hand in hand with the Council on Foreign Relations to carry out the shadow government's plans to put these things in as actual government policy. So putting CIA spook McMullin into such positions in Congress is certainly one of many examples of the CIA's infiltration into our Congress to shape our laws and our policies. Now, what was it that McMullen did for the CIA back when he was active with them? Well, here we have McMullen, who was not married, which is kind of unique for a Mormon. He spent a decade in the Middle East, in North Africa, South Asia, with the National Clandestine Service. He was working on counterintelligence and intelligence operations. His specialty, and he confirmed this in his own words, his specialty was forming alliances with members of terrorist groups. He was basically the bridge between the CIA and terrorists. McMullen worked directly with Al-Qaeda. He worked with others. He was the liaison. In fact, though I can't state it yet with absolute certainty, it does look very likely that Evan McMullen is an integral link between the extremists in Syria and U.S. government officials that have met with them. It's a fact that McMullen attended that meeting in Turkey. We can see him there in the photos in 2014, a meeting at which U.S. congressmen and others were forming plans. We've got the U.S. politician in the meeting. We've got the Muslim Brotherhood representative. They were there to discuss how to arm and carry out things to assist the extremist groups. Those people who are in the photo with McCain, those groups. So given that McMullen's specialty was forming CIA relationships with terrorists, it is highly likely that he had something to do with the arrangement of John McCain's meeting these various Al-Qaeda and other extremist leaders, these guys who went on to create ISIS. The cold hard truth is that the Syrian Emergency Task Force really is nothing more than the political arm, the political wing of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. That's what it is. Those terror groups are represented by lobbyists like Mustafa and Obagi. This Al-Qaeda political arm is represented by CIA operatives like Evan McMullen, represented in the U.S. Congress by CIA assets like Kinzinger and McCain. And if you want evidence that this deep state, this deep state nexus truly did try to get Hillary Clinton elected instead of Trump, just remember who Trump's most outspoken critics were back during the campaign. Congressman Kinzinger didn't just complain about Trump. He actually said that during the 2016 election, he had strongly looked into running as a third-party candidate to try and keep Trump from winning the presidency. That's by his own admission. Then we've got John McCain. He savaged Trump at every opportunity, and we know that McCain played a big role in that scandalous Golden Showers dossier. Then we've got Evan McMullen. He formed political alliances with never-Trumpers like Mitt Romney, and he himself put forward his own political presidential candidacy. The plan that McMullen and his group had was to pull enough Mormon votes in Utah away from Trump to throw the election to Hillary. There was and there was a lot of CIA assets in the media who were talking about how Trump was going to lose in Utah, that Utah was going to go blue, which is outrageously stupid to think that. But they were trying to shape opinion. They were trying to mold, craft this very thing, bring it about by telling the people of Utah this is what's going to happen. So they assumed it was a foregone conclusion. Well, the very same men who were quietly conspiring together in foreign countries with terrorist leaders to overthrow the Syrian government, those were the same figures who worked together to try and throw the presidential election from Trump to Hillary Clinton. Sadly, in the end of all this, it really hasn't mattered who won, because Trump has since abandoned his opposition to the Syrian war. I mean, people elected him partly because he said, I'm getting us out of Syria. And we know that he, of course, is fully on board with the war in Syria. These are the intrigues of the deep state. So yes, Evan McMullin, I hope you're watching. Your claim that the deep state is not real is bullcrap. You are very much a part of it. And for those of you wondering, yes, the name of the mind-controlled satanic ritual abuse survivor that you guys saw me chase off my property with a baseball bat, his name was also Evan McMullin. But no, that is not the same guy. Both Evan McMullins are from Utah, but they're different people. Well, folks, there is so much more that we could have gone over in this video. I tried my best to keep it as short as possible, but I wanted you to see how the deep state really works by showing you one of their little operations to foment war, to do dirty deeds on behalf of the New World Order and the Rothschild Mafia without much involvement from our elected government. And in this video, I revealed some very important information, and I hope you'll take the time to share this video with others. This is an expose on deep corruption in our system. It is eating away at our freedoms like a malignant cancer. And I wish I could somehow trumpet this information from the mountaintops for everyone to hear. I want everyone to know this stuff. So I'm asking you all to be my trumpets. Help me to spread this message far and wide and alert our fellow citizens to the reality of the awful situation that we're in. If we are to save our republic, it is only going to happen if we first educate the public. We have to educate the masses. Help them see what this shadow government is doing. First, help them to see it's not conspiracy theory. This is really happening. Help them to see how this is going on. And I only gave you a very small sample here. This kind of activity is happening on a grand global scale on a daily basis. Well, in my next video, I am going to conclude this series by discussing details about other deep state agencies in this spider web of corruption. I'll talk about how they work together as a network that is unelected and unaccountable. If you stayed with me through the whole video, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. For Blackstone Intelligence, I'm Jake Morphonios.